We continue the story of Jaguar's famous sports racing car, the D-Type. After victory in the 1955 Le Mans 24-hour race, Jaguar was determined to continue its racing success that year. After Le Mans, the next race for Jaguar was at Aintree in England. A single Works D-Type was entered for Mike Hawthorne and was up against 4 Works DB3S Aston Martins, their superior slow corner handling making them ideal for the twisty Aintree circuit. The Jaguar had non-independent rear suspension, and in practice Hawthorne was slower than the Aston Martins. Nonetheless, the Jaguar driver made the better start and charged through from the second row of the grid to lead for 1 lap before the Astons went past, leaving Hawthorne to finish 5th, the best he could do. While the Jaguar D-Type was well suited to the high-speed endurance races at Le Mans, races on short or bumpy circuits didn't suit the car. For the Goodwood 9-hour race, Tony Rolt and Duncan Hamilton, the longest-serving Jaguar team members, managed to obtain the use of a works car. Also entered was a private Ecurie Ecosse D-Type driven by Desmond Titterington and Ninian Sanderson. In the race, Rolt made a fine start and was running in 4th place when the distributor failed. Tony Rolt retired from motorsport after this race. He'd been racing since 1937, and in the Second World War he was a prisoner of war at the infamous Colditz Castle. He went on to lead the Ferguson Company, developing 4-wheel drive systems. Meanwhile, the Ecurie Ecosse car was being driven quickly by Titterington and Sanderson, and having a great scrap with the Aston Martin team. Both marques led in this battle of tyre wear and pit stops. At the end, the Jaguar was running strongly in 2nd place and catching the leaders, Dennis Poor and Peter Walker's Aston Martin. The Tony Brooks-Peter Collins Aston was 3rd after suffering an electrical problem, with the unheralded Bill Smith 4th, sharing with Lance Macklin in an HWM Jaguar. The 1954 ex-Works D-Type of Bob Berry and Norman Dewis was 5th. The last important British event on the 1955 calendar was the RAC Tourist Trophy at Dundrod in Northern Ireland, celebrating its 50th anniversary. It was the 5th time that the event was held at the daunting Dundrod Road course. The race attracted entries from Mercedes-Benz, 3 cars to be driven by Moss and Fangio, Kling and Fitch, and von Trips and Hermann. Ferrari had Castellotti and Maglioli, Maserati, Beira and Musso. Aston Martin entered Brooks and Collins, Salvadori and Parnell, Poor and Walker. Jaguar entered a single car for Hawthorne and Titterington. A de Dion-type suspension was tried in practice, but it proved too slow, and the standard D-Type was substituted for the race. Bob Berry was in the private Broadhead Jaguar. Surprisingly, he went straight into the lead, followed by Hawthorne. Halfway around the first lap, Moss moved ahead in the Mercedes, followed by Hawthorne. Peter Collins had been left on the start line, unable to start, and was last away. Towards the end of lap 2, Bob Berry, going strongly in 3rd place, went off the course and into a ditch after a tyre deflated. On the 3rd lap, a bad crash occurred when the leaders came up to lap Dubarry's Mercedes 300 SL, resulting in the deaths of Jim Mayer and Bill Smith, who was still doing his national service. Smith had been promised a works drive by Jaguar's competition manager Lofty England and was a fine prospect. Among the others involved were Peter Jopp, Ken Wharton and unfortunately Lance Macklin, who was also in the Le Mans tragedy and retired from racing after this race. Meanwhile, the Masters were showing their class to the appreciative Irish crowd. While Moss established a lead, Hawthorne and Fangio renewed their Le Mans duel and brought the crowd in the grandstand to its feet. Hawthorne held 2nd place until lap 14 when Fangio slipped past. Hawthorne fought back, swapping places with the world champion until he began to draw away again on lap 17. 2 laps later, Hawthorn set a new lap record, 4 minutes 42 seconds, at a speed of 94.67 miles an hour. Hawthorn pitted after 25 laps, handing the car over to Titterington. Fangio pitted after 29 laps, and Moss came in a lap later with a ruined rear tyre. The tread had come off and ripped open the bodywork like a knife. A large area of the body around the wheel was removed, and John Fitch was sent out in the car. Desmond Titterington was a very talented but underrated driver. On his home ground, his Jaguar pulled away from the Mercedes as it began to rain. The Jaguar was being driven to its limit, while the Mercedes was being driven by their number 2 drivers, both experienced but past their best. John Fitch was brought in after only 7 laps, and Moss returned to the race. Then Kling came in to be replaced by Fangio. In the rain, Moss and Fangio began to make up the deficit, but Titterington was still more than 2 minutes in front when he came into the pits to hand over to Hawthorn on lap 51. In the wet, the Jaguar, even driven by Hawthorn at his best, couldn't hold off the Mercedes. Moss passed Hawthorn on lap 56, only to make an emergency stop for tyres and fuel, letting Hawthorn back into the lead. Moss soon caught up again and outbraked Hawthorn at the hairpin. The weather was improving, but not enough to give the Jaguar a chance of more than an honourable second place. Then, on lap 82, Hawthorn felt something go in the engine, declutched, and could have coasted over the line in third place, but the car spun on its own oil. Hawthorn walked back to the pits to explain to team manager Lofty England and Desmond Titterington what had happened. Mercedes won the day, finishing 1-2-3, with the sports car based on the W196 Grand Prix car. Desmond Titterington had created a local legend for himself, having led the TT for 25 glorious laps. Jaguar boss Sir William Lyons wrote to both drivers, thanking them for their efforts in upholding British and Jaguar prestige and sending each a personal bonus cheque. The Jaguars were seen at Silverstone again when finally the car with De Dion suspension had its first and last race. Roy Salvadori's Aston Martin closed the door on the D-Type, and the accident took out a number of other cars. In 1956, 2 Works D-Types were entered for the Nürburgring 1000 kilometres. The cars had road-holding problems, excessive bumps wearing out the dampers. Mike Hawthorn and Desmond Titterington were entered in a new fuel-injected version. Paul Freer and Duncan Hamilton had a carburetted version. Freer crashed his car in practice and another was driven out too late to practice, so he started at the back of the field. Hawthorn led before being passed by both Fangio and Moss. Hawthorn and Titterington managed to keep the car in the top 4 until just before the finish, when a half shaft broke. Paul Freer had started last and worked up to 6th before he crashed again. Sterling Moss and Jean Beira gave Maserati a rare and well-deserved win. In June, the 24 Hours of Le Mans came around once more. In addition to works cars for Hawthorn and Bueb in the fuel-injected car, Freer, Titterington and Jack Fairman were recalled to the team alongside Ken Wharton, a late replacement for the sacked Duncan Hamilton. There was an entry for the Scottish Ecurie Cost team of Ron Flockhart and Ninian Sanderson, and the yellow Ecurie National Belge D-Type. Ferrari entered 3 2-litre Type 625s with an engine similar to their Grand Prix cars. Aston Martin had a new prototype, the DBR1 250, their new car on which they were basing their future, and 2 DB3Ss which were already uncompetitive. With his customary sprint, Sterling Moss was first away, followed by Flockhart and Hawthorn's D-Types, who quickly reeled him in. At Mulsanne corner, Moss outbraked them both to retake the lead. Hawthorn soon repassed him, but disaster was to strike the Jaguar team on the second lap. It had started to rain, and as Paul Freer and Jack Fairman approached the S's in 5th and 6th places, they both spun. Freer hit the wall hard while travelling backwards and badly damaged the rear of the car. Jack Fairman managed to brake hard and stop, but was then hit by De Portago's Ferrari. The result, 3 retirements in quick succession. Hawthorn, as expected, had shot off into the lead, only to have to come into the pits after several laps with a severe misfire. The spark plugs were changed and the car sent back out, but it soon returned, the problem eventually traced to a cracked fuel injection pipe. By the time it was repaired, Hawthorn had dropped right back to the tail of the field and would have to fight his way back up. Just as Jaguar was beginning to despair, the Akira Kos team came to the rescue. Ron Flockhart, a driver who never quite made the big time in Grand Prix racing, was a good long-distance sports car driver and now proceeded to show why. He caught up with the Aston Martins of Moss and Walker and started to battle for the lead. Flockhart took the lead, only for Moss to repass him on the outside at Tetra Rouge. But Flockhart was soon back in front, and there was nothing that Stirling Moss nor co-driver Peter Collins could do to stop him. The second of the Astons, the Salvadori Walker car, was slowed by gearbox problems. The Jaguar was faster on the Mulsanne straight, so Flockhart and Sanderson used this advantage to build their lead on the Aston Martin. The Olivier Gendebien Maurice Trintignant Ferrari was third, while the Andre Simon Phil Hill Ferrari had retired. Mike Hawthorn and Ivor Boerb, now firing on all cylinders, were tearing around the circuit trying to make up lost time, but were held back by newly introduced fuel restrictions. Overnight, the Scottish Jaguar continued to pull away from the Aston Martin. Through Sunday morning, Flockhart and Sanderson were a lap in front of the Aston Martin, which was handicapped a little by the loss of first gear. Hawthorn and Boerb were relentlessly coming back through the field, up to 8th place. Ecuriacos boss David Murray and chief mechanic Wilkie Wilkinson began to think that they could achieve the near impossible, a win at Le Mans for a private team. Belgian D-Type, driven by Jacques Swartas and Freddie Roussel, was maintaining its usual standard and tradition and was going to finish 4th. A Porsche was 5th, and the Hawthorn-Boerb car was still making up time into 6th. At 4 o'clock, the delighted Scottish team started to celebrate as Ron Flockhart crossed the line to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans at their first attempt. And with that, Jaguar's works racing effort came to an end. Racing success created demand for their cars, and a fire at the factory meant they had to concentrate on building cars rather than going racing. Competition director, Lofty England.
At the end of '56, we didn't think our cars were good enough to be sure of winning the next year. So the idea was we already had this prototype E-Type on the go then. And we pulled out thinking that we'd have enough time to get organised and come back in '58.
That never happened, but Jaguar continued to support private owners like David Murray's Ecuriacos. What was he like to work with?
David Murray wasn't the easiest bloke to deal with, I don't think, but he was a Scotsman. And, you know, he was a sort of it was his team of motor cars, you know. And he had a big investment in it, and he had his own say, and he sort of ruled them. I got on all right with him, but some people didn't. And the car that won in '57, we lent him anyway. It was our car.
The Scottish team were a staunch ally of Jaguar and helped the marque enormously. Team leader David Murray was a chartered accountant and a member of a wine trade family. He'd been a keen amateur racing driver, having close links with Reg Parnell's Racing Car Centre at Derby in the English Midlands. He then decided that he was not a potential world champion, so decided to form and manage his own team, a Scottish stable, Ecurie Ecosse. The cars were prepared by Wilkie Wilkinson, Sandy Arthur, Stan Sproat, Ron Gordian and Patrick Meehan at Murray's premises in Merchiston Mews in Edinburgh. As the team began to make a name for themselves, they started to receive works assistance. In 1955, the team had bought the first 2 pre-production D-types. This led to the purchase of another car in 1956 and their superb Le Mans victory. For 1957, the team took delivery of the 3 X-Works long-nose D-types. To make space at Merchiston Mews and to keep the team solvent, the team sold their earlier D-types, XKD 502 and 561, but retained the 1956 Le Mans winning car. Ferrari and Maserati decided that Jaguar had won at Le Mans too often and were going to put a stop to it. From the start, it developed into a very fast and competitive race. The big works Ferraris and Maseratis setting the sort of pace usually associated with Grand Prix races. Peter Collins, in one of the Type 412 Ferraris, was first away and broke the lap record from a standing start, but soon fell back and was out of the race within the hour with a blown piston. Hawthorn, now driving for Ferrari, took the lead, followed by the 2 big Maseratis and the Ferrari 312 of Jean de Bion and Trintignant. Fifth was the 3.8-litre Ecurie Ecosse Jaguar, driven by Flockhart and Buerb. The 3.8-litre engine had originally come about by American Alfred Momo overboring the 3.4. Jaguar was impressed, so they decided to build their own. The original 3.4 XK120 was bored out to 3.8 and eventually to 4.2 litres. The 4.2 block was engineered so that it could even be bored out to 4.5 litres. After a slow start, Jean Behra took the open-top Maserati into the lead, but broke its back axle after 3 hours. Sterling Moss was having a most uncomfortable drive in the Maserati Coupe. It was getting very hot. Hawthorn was delayed at a pit stop, but seemed unconcerned when the mechanics couldn't get the spare tyre to fit in the rear of the car. In the early evening, the Maserati Coupe finally also succumbed to rear axle failure. Mike Hawthorn's Ferrari followed soon after, but not before it had set a new lap record of 126.147 miles an hour, the first lap in under 4 minutes. To the chagrin of Ferrari and Maserati, a Jaguar was again leading the Le Mans 24 Hours, and again it was the Flockhart Buerb 3.8-litre Ecurie Ecosse car. Aston Martin was also in trouble, 2 cars out before midnight and the surviving DBR1 crashing at Tetra Rouge, injuring driver Tony Brooks. After 12 hours, Jaguar was in the enviable position of having cars in the first 4 places. British supporters were also able to cheer on the little 750cc Lotus Climax, which was dominating the opposition in its class. The only Jaguar to experience trouble was the Hamilton-Gregory D-Type, which lost a lot of time due to electrical trouble and an unusual exhaust problem. The ignition timing was slipping and the exhaust had become excessively hot and burnt through. Eventually, only a major welding operation prevented the passenger compartment from being permanently on fire. Once this problem was fixed, Duncan Hamilton and Maston Gregory started to rush back through the field and were up to 11th place. During the afternoon, the leading car carried on serenely, Flockhart and Buerb easily maintaining their lead over their teammates. The Sanderson-Lawrence Jaguar only had 1 unscheduled pit stop to fix a loose plug lead. Late in the race, the Belgian team were unlucky when an ignition fault stopped Freddie Russell on the circuit for 55 minutes. He was able to get back to the pits for repairs, and they managed to finish 4th. After a steady drive, the French D-Type of Lucas and Broussin finished third. Duncan Hamilton and Maston Gregory, driving in the way they both loved, flat out, had brought their D-Type back up to sixth place. David Murray and Wilkie Wilkinson now allowed themselves to believe that they could win Le Mans for a second time. Right on 4 p.m, the Ecurie Cost Jaguars crossed the finishing line first and second to set the seal on a crushing British Le Mans victory. The winning Jaguar averaged 114 miles an hour, completing 326 laps and covering 2,732 miles, a record that was to stand until 1961. Second, Sanderson and Lawrence, Ecurie Cross D-Type. Third, Lucas Broussin, French D-Type. Fourth, Freer and Roussel, Belgian D-Type. And fifth, Lewis Evans and Severi in a Ferrari. Rounding out the top six, Hamilton and Gregory in their D-Type. In 1958, the FIA brought in a 3-litre limit for sports cars, and this new regulation was to bring Jaguar's interest in motor racing to a close. The magnificent XK engine had not been designed as a 3-litre, and it proved difficult for Jaguar to make a 3-litre version of it work.
There were two 3-litre engines in the first place, and the first ones we ran gave no trouble. In fact, if Mr. Hamilton hadn't done an upside downer, it would have been second in 1958. But that was a 3.4 engine with a short stroke crank with tall pistons, which gave no trouble. Then we went to the proper engine, the proper 3-litre with a lowered height block, but with an aluminium block. And also, Wilhelmshaven used titanium conrods. But the ones, I think the listed ones that ran at Le Mans didn't have aluminium blocks. They had cast iron blocks, but titanium rods, and all the titanium rods broke.
The two Ecurie Cost cars went out within a half an hour of the start with piston failure, while two other private entrants crashed. Duncan Hamilton was back in his own D-Type with a special engine developed by Jaguar, a long-stroke 3-litre. Lofty England was there to keep an eye on things, with the quick and dependable two-time winner Ivor Boerb sharing the driving with Duncan. Although D-Type Jaguars were raced again at Le Mans in 1959 and 1960, they weren't successful, the engine letting them down. The D-Type Jaguar had essentially been built as a racing car, and now Jaguar as a company was concentrating on the introduction of the E-Type, a production road car. They had only gone into racing to help them sell cars, and with the D-Type's 3 Le Mans wins, that had been achieved. The D-Type Jaguar, one of motorsport's most enduring icons.